Like, I was born here in the United States. My sister was born here. My brother, as I mentioned, was born in Korea. Um, but growing up, my parents would speak Korean to me. I went to Korean school, kind of the obligatory going to Korean school on Saturday mornings. Didn't really enjoy it very much. I was not a great student. My grandmother lived with us after my grandfather, my paternal grandfather passed away. My grandmother came to live with us. I think when I was about 4 or 5. So she lived with us and only spoke Korean. So I would speak Korean with her a little bit, and that's how I certainly got to know a bit more about the culture as well, both from my parents and my grandparents. And obviously, Korean school helped to a certain extent. But once I started going to elementary school, kindergarten, first grade, I spent most of my time in school or with friends, um, and so it's that point when it starts diverging a little bit, right? You're not just in the kind of Korean American immigrant family bubble. You're also out among mostly non-Koreans. There are very few, if any, Koreans or Asians in my elementary school and middle school, some in my high school. So growing up, most of my friends were white, and I lost a lot of my Korean language. I think I spoke better Korean probably when I was 6 or 7 than I did, when I graduated from high school. Um, I tried to, get back to some of that in college when I took Korean language courses, and then obviously I went to Korea for a couple of years. So I feel like I, was able to kind of retain or rather recapture some of that Korean language ability. Um, but on the one hand, it was a very typical Korean immigrant kid life. Going to Korean school, going to Korean church. Hanging out with the other Korean immigrant families and going on picnics and road trips and whatever. There weren't a ton of Korean groceries around here. There was like one small Korean grocery store, no big H Marts, no Korean restaurant. So it was all very family focused. Um, and but on the other hand, I had a kind of a very typical Maryland suburban kid life, growing up and doing Maryland suburban kid things, riding my bike around, going to the pool, and hanging out with my friends and playing video games and whatever. So it wasn't like hard Scrabble, upbringing. And again, hardly a testament to my parents. They kind of scraping and clawing and doing what they could to provide for me. And I was the youngest kid. I'm sure my siblings will say I was the spoiled kid of the bunch and was able to have a really good childhood. I don't know about my Asian American identity. Well, certainly my Asian American identity is what, in a way, influenced my decision to go to law school. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, my decision to go to law school was um, based a lot on my interest in working with the Asian American community on civil rights issues. Trying to help out the community and thinking that a law degree might help in some respects. Um, I went a different path in the sense of I went to, working in a law firm and being an AUSA. That being said, sort of the sense of public service, a sense of public interest in working, that absolutely was, partly from my Asian American identity of being, a sense of being a minority, trying to help, promote the interests of justice and equality. Certainly to the extent that, in a very large extent, my parents' influence and the influence of my father and mother instilling in me the sense of giving back to the community, being a good citizen, being, somebody who's contributing to society. That certainly impacted me as well, and it played a role in starting out the. I don't know if I talked about this already, but I started the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center in DC. So while I was in law school, during my third year of law school, we started a free legal clinic or a legal clinic um, referral service, if you will, for Asian Americans in the DC area. And started as an all volunteer organization. We got law students from the various DC schools to help staff a multilingual hotline, and then we worked with other Asian American attorneys in the area to try and develop a pro bono service, and then ultimately became a separate, fully funded nonprofit organization that's now still in existence. It's actually coming up on its 20th anniversary soon.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it's great. So that's certainly my Asian American identity played into wanting to, um, you know, do as much as I could, either in building an organization like the APA Legal Resource Center, or continuing to give back over time on public policy issues. And whether it's as an AUSA, when I was a prosecutor, I certainly was conscious of the fact that I was an Asian American. Certainly was conscious of the fact that I was oftentimes the only Asian American in the room, whether it's the law enforcement folks or in the courtroom. And that played a role in me being even more committed to doing as much as I could and doing as good of a job as I could. In the public policy context and on the Hill, there are very relatively few Asian Americans, more now, but when I first got there weren't many at all. There still aren't a lot on the Senate side in particular. And I think I appreciate the fact that it's important to be at the table. It's important to be in the room. It's important to be a part of the process. And it's important to be able to provide a different perspective as an Asian American and as the son of immigrants. I graduated from college. I went to Korea for 2 years. I taught English there at a couple different universities for a couple years. While I was in Korea, I applied to law school. Went to law school in '95, I guess. At Georgetown Law, started law school there, and wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to do. I thought I wanted to do civil rights work, working with the Asian American community. I thought I wanted to do public policy work, and then a lot of my classes I took were centered around that. I took a federal legislation clinic. I interned for Senator Ted Kennedy, as a law clerk for a semester. But then, life, family circumstances, got married, got a clerkship with a federal judge in Greenbelt, Maryland, actually not far from where I kind of lived or grew up until I was 6. And then, went to a law firm, partly because of, my wife was working in the nonprofit sector, working on Asian American issues actually, and wanted to try and pay down some loans and get a house and whatever. So I went to a law firm. I got good training, was a litigator there, worked at a firm called Aiken Gump in DC, but then went out to Virginia to help open a tech office out there, and then was there for about 4 years. Went then to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Maryland, back to the courthouse where I clerked in Greenbelt, and for Judge Massetti. Peter Massetti was the judge I clerked for, and then I actually appeared before him for a while when I was an assistant U.S. attorney. So I was a federal prosecutor doing criminal cases in Greenbelt from 2003 until 2011, end of 2011, or 2010. But in 2009, so I did a bunch of trials. I worked on criminal cases. I worked on drug cases, violent crime, gun cases, child pornography, tax, immigration fraud, white-collar cases, a whole range of cases. The last 2 years of my time at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I worked a lot on gang cases, so organized crime gang cases, particularly around MS-13, which is a gang, a Salvadoran gang, actually started in LA, but then kind of developed in El Salvador. And that was extremely rewarding, interesting, very intense, very stressful. I ran into somebody after a series of trials when I was talking about moving on to just try something else, and they told me about a detail opportunity on the Hill. So it was basically where I could get loaned out, stay as an AOSA, but got loaned out from the Department of Justice to the Hill. So I became a detailee for Senator Patrick Leahy from Vermont. He was then the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And that was in June of 2009. And essentially I was in the Senate for about 8 years, from 2009 until just recently this year. And so I was detailee, I stayed on permanently, was senior counsel, then became general counsel for the committee for the Democrats. working for Senator Leahy, and then after November of last year, after the election, when he went to the Appropriations Committee and Senator Feinstein became ranking member, I stayed on. She asked me to stay on as general counsel for the Democrats for the Senate Judiciary Committee under her. And then now I'm at a lobbying, consulting, government affairs firm called Monument Policy Group. I got there about 2 months ago, working mostly with tech clients. It's a combination of government affairs, communications, strategic consulting, lobbying, and I'm still learning. I mean, part of what I like about it right now is it's very new and interesting, working with technology companies, sort of cutting edge issues on privacy and surveillance and encryption, cybersecurity, sort of the intellectual property, antitrust issues around software platforms, social media platforms. So it's more just being in a policy arena where there's a lot of new things happening and a lot of interesting legal issues and policy issues to tackle. Yeah, I mean, it was the spring of 1997, I guess. I remember thinking that there needed to be something in the DC area. There was not a legal services organization dedicated solely to Asian Americans. There was ALDEF in New York City. There was a center out in LA. There was the Asian Law Caucus out in San Francisco, but there wasn't anything in DC, and there was a real need. It was sort of on the heels of 1996, welfare reform, immigration reform laws. I was aware of a lot of different issues popping up where Asian Americans were concerned and unsure about what to do, whether it's social security benefits or disability benefits, welfare benefits, and not sure what to do, how to go about finding where they stood, and what their circumstances were when it came to those benefits, on immigration issues as well. And there just seemed to be a real need. I remember talking with my wife about the need for that, and I said maybe we should start something up. And I thought about trying to do something through the law school, and happened to then hook up or link up with Charan Joel, who was another law student at Georgetown, same year as me. She had actually been thinking about the same sort of thing, and so we actually sort of joined forces. And over the summer of 1997, started developing a plan for how we would try to start something up without any research. I think we got $500 from the Student Bar Association as seed money, and then we got a small office about the size of a closet, and 1 or 2 phones, and developed basically a system where we would have volunteer law students from Georgetown, GW, George Washington, American University, Catholic University, come and volunteer to staff a multilingual hotline. So students who spoke multiple Asian languages coming to do intake, and then they would help refer those cases. So they do the intake, and then they refer those cases to other legal services organizations in the DC area or pro bono attorneys. And so that's where we started partnering with APABA, which is the Asian Pacific American Bar Association. And we partnered with them to get ourselves stood up as a 501c3 nonprofit organization, but then also to get a board going and start getting full-time staff. And then my wife, Jane, actually became the first executive director of the APA Legal Resource Center, because she helped write some of the funding requests, and she'd been coming off of doing a lot of policy work on the Asian American issues with at that point it was called the National Asian Pacific American Legal Center, Law Center. Anyways, it's changed its name now to Asian American Justice Center, AAJC. So it started out all volunteer. We had a very small crew. Now it's still going. It's thriving. They've got full-time attorneys. They've got staff. They've got now work in both Maryland and Virginia, as well as here in DC. I'm not involved still as a board member, but we still try to support it and do what we can to help out. One of the main issues I'm working on right now is for a client called Reform Government Surveillance. So we it's a coalition of some big tech companies, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook, Yahoo, now known as Oath, Twitter, Dropbox, Snap, Evernote. I'm probably missing one. But we're working on issues related to government surveillance, privacy issues, encryption, how law enforcement accesses data. And so, these companies, I think, are very concerned about making sure that the users' privacy is protected from kind of undue or overbroad government surveillance, trying to, make sure that they advocate for proper checks and balances, while obviously trying to cooperate and work with the government on legitimate law enforcement and intelligence community needs. One of the main issues right now is on reauthorization of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, Section 702, which is related to government surveillance, mostly targeted overseas on non-U.S. persons or foreigners, but that sweeps in U.S. persons' information, and so to the extent that might impinge upon U.S. persons or American citizens' privacies, trying to make sure that there's the right balance there as they do the reauthorization. So that's one of the big issues, but then there's other, sort of hot button issues like encryption, device encryption on your iPhone, when's it proper for a company to try and build a device that is fully encrypted and is protected from hackers and other people like that, but how much should they be, how much of a backdoor or loophole or whatever you might call it should you build in to allow the government to access it, and do you allow for that, and if you do, does that somehow degrade the security of it? How much do you allow for end-to-end encryption when it comes to messaging apps or platforms, and protecting that from other people, third parties intercepting or hacking into it, but in doing so, are you then providing a platform for encrypted communications for criminals and terrorists and whatever it might be? So some touchy issues, which are interesting. If there's an issue I could work on, I feel like I'm working on some pretty interesting issues right now. I will, say that some of the issues I worked on. One of the great things, I'll back up. One of the great things about my job now, but also the job I had before at the Senate Judiciary Committee, is to get to work on a broad range of issues, a variety of different things. Again, from the technology issues to, the whole range of issues that come before the Judiciary Committee, whether it's on civil rights issues or immigration or intellectual property. I will say one of the issues that really resonated with me while I was at the Senate Judiciary Committee and still, feels heavy in my heart in a way, is the whole issue of gun control or, gun safety issues. I was there at the Senate after the Newtown shootings happened in Sandy Hook. Obviously wasn't at Sandy Hook, but we, certainly from the policy perspective, we're trying to figure out how to respond. And I feel like there were some very reasonable, rational responses to that, but to see even a fairly moderate compromise bill get voted down was discouraging and hard to see. I was there when Gabby Giffords came and testified before our committee with pretty powerful emotional testimony. Even though she is still recovering from herself being the victim of gun violence, and now to see again instance after instance of mass shootings, and to not see there really be any progress on some reasonable, practical reforms that could help. It wouldn't be a total panacea or something that prevents any and all gun violence. I don't think anybody thinks that that's the case, but some of these proposals I think would certainly help. So, I'm not sure.
You're not sure? Okay, let me do a different question.
Yeah, I've been, I'm sort of in the mindset that I don't really have regrets about anything in terms of just, everything's a learning experience. Everything is a way to kind of build. I'm sure I've made mistakes along the way or not done things the way I wanted to exactly looking back, but I've always kind of built on. If I had to, not to say redo the career, but I certainly would have taken more advantage of mentorship opportunities. I would have taken more advantage of sort of learning opportunities and really digging in to some of the subject matters, everything they've done. Just setting an example for me, teaching me everything, providing for me. They immigrated in 1965. My dad is 65. My mom in 1966. They came to the United States. My dad came from a very, very poor family. I think his dad was a carpenter. But my dad was a pretty smart guy. He that's the way he was able to kind of get out of poverty. So by we've done an oral history actually of him, and we've tried to write things about him, but there's still more to learn, and so I'm not sure if I'll get all the details right on this, but I do know that he was one of the top student I think in his middle school that helped him get a scholarship or get into high school. I think in his second or third year of high school, he was taking the test, and he was graduate top of his class, or was able to get into Seoul National University. But I think he was so poor at that time, or didn't have the money, and so I remember like my mom telling the teachers took up a collection to help him get there. He tutored his way all the way through, I think high school, but even college. Tutored his way through to help pay for his college education, while also sending money back to his parents so they could help his brother as well get through. So it's a pretty, sort of rags to riches, not riches, but rags to middle class story, where he was able to, through his brains, get an education. I mean, he literally was studying by candlelight with a dirt floor, all that stuff. And then came to the United States, and got was able, after going through the Air Force, came to the United States, did his PhD program here in the United States, and then stayed in the United States working in the federal government for about 35 years. And my mom came over as well. She came after my son was born, and her first son, my oldest brother was born, came over as well. And they lived in Maryland. They settled in Maryland. They've kind of come up over time as my mom worked for a while as well. She had some pretty bad health problems, so stopped working after a little bit. My dad, was a federal public servant for, again, 30 plus years, plugging away, putting 3 kids through college, and all of us did, I think okay. And it's all a testament to their kind of commitment and hard work. Most memorable experiences. It sounds hokey, but honestly, the most memorable was just kind of hanging out with friends, in the dorm rooms, and I'm just trying to think what the coolest experience was. One of the things I did all the time was play volleyball, and that was fun. So in terms of memorable experiences, just the road trips to different tournaments. Actually, with it was a Korean American team or Asian American team as well, and we just go to these different tournaments up in Boston or New York or Pennsylvania, or just kind of up and down the Mid-Atlantic. And that was, I think, we did that pretty regularly, and so I think that was the one thing I definitely remember about the college experience. And just, for me, the college experience was more of just meeting like super, super interesting, weird, wacky, brilliant people, and learning about them and their experiences. It was good. It was a new organization. We actually, I think it started the year before I got there, or a couple years. Maybe it was a little longer, but there weren't a lot of Korean Americans. It started growing over time. That was a great experience. I was an officer on the board at some point for that. We actually also, an offshoot, we started, I guess this was another memorable experience. We started a Samunori group, so we started it's called Unity. We started the Korean drum group at Yale, I remember going down. We went to Flushing, New York, where there's like some folks who were like super good at that, and sort of like the experts who were our teachers. Learning how to play Korean drums when we didn't have Korean drums yet, so we had to raise money. So we started learning on like ramen boxes and making a lot of noise. And once we got the drums, and getting kicked out of various school buildings, university buildings, because we were making too much noise and waking up the dorm rooms. So that was fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, I'm like everywhere with all these questions.
Yeah. Oh, I will say, sorry, I'm back in terms of like a memorable experience. I do remember, just in terms of tying into the Asian American experience, I do remember being on campus when the LA riots happened, and so that was a memorable experience in the sense that it was a time where we in the Asian American community and the Korean American community in particular, because of all the violence that was happening in Koreatown, and I had friends who were from Koreatown, and they were trying to keep tabs on their family as well, but getting together and sort of linking arms with the African American students group, with the Latino students group, with other student groups as well, advocating for better relationships, not just out obviously throughout the country in LA, but particularly in New Haven, and protesting out on the plaza, and going into, there was a big alumni gathering, and we were protesting out. We got to go in and speak and talk to them, and remember being one of the representatives, speaking out on these issues. And that was, it was a small thing. It was, certainly not, looking back, I'm not sure that we, changed the course of, the relationships, but it was certainly, at least for me, a memorable experience, and part of what helped me to, stay involved, with the community, trying to be active and trying to also work in coalition with other people and other groups.
Or like because like for me, I think like actually, yeah, because like for me it would be like one thing that like my parents always like make sure to pound into me is like respect.
Yeah, I mean that was a word that was coming to my mind as well. I mean, it sounds very stereotypical, right? And like, oh, the Confucian values. Yeah, but I think there's a lot to be said for that, right? I mean, it's the respect, but it goes back also to the kind of connection or connectedness and relationship to people. So it's not just empty respect, right? It's not just like bowing or showing respect, or giving something with two hands, as it's sort of an empty gesture. It's a connection between a personal relationship and learning and getting to care for somebody, and the respect that you kind of imbue into that in a way, right? It's not just, and I think that's what I've learned from my parents and learned in the Korean culture. And like, it's Koreans are feisty folks, right? And Koreans, it's the chang, right? It's like the feeling, the sense that there's really a connection there between people, right? So I think that's more. It's like it is. And this is something I picked up more and more when I went to Korea, but also like looking back on my time growing up with my parents and my grandmother who lived with us for many years. It's not just like hollow formality of respect. It is the respect that comes out of knowing and understanding how you are connected and you relate to people, and how you have to learn and how much you have to learn from folks who are your elders and your peers, your 선배 even, right? But how much also they have done for you, whether you know it or not. I'm not sure about life lessons, but I'll say that one thing that I've certainly learned over the years is that relationships matter, that personal connections, not in the sort of transactional sense, but personal connectedness and relationships matter, not only in the personal and family context and friendship context, but also at work, also at in the professional sense. When I was a prosecutor, it was important to have a personal connection or relationship with both my colleagues, but then also defense counsel, also the judges, also even the agents I worked with, not that I was best friends with everybody, but to have some, a sense of the other person's humanity, and I think that goes a long way. To do it so genuinely, I think, is important, because to have an interest in other people's lives, and you may not like everybody. In fact, I know I didn't like everybody, but it's a matter of also just making that effort, to at least try to have some sort of connection, and that, I think, goes a long way over time, um, towards whatever the other, whether it's professional or um, uh, you know personal goal, whatever it might be, to try to achieve that. I'll say, like, a part of it is just being flexible in terms of your sense of what is it you want to do, what your skills are, what your interests are, and then what your passion is. I think it's hard because everybody always says, follow your passion, follow your passion. It's hard to figure out what your passion is sometimes. And so that's a very difficult first step sometimes for some people. I'm not my own personality, and I mean, I think my family will say this, is my friends. I'm not, like, extremely one way or the other. I'm not passionate, in the sense that that's not my personality of displaying extreme emotion, or commitment and dedication to one thing or another in a very, very vocal, outspoken, passionate sort of way. So that's just my personality. I think my professional life has been the same sort of kind of gradually sort of shifting or moving, or flowing into, flow might be the better word, flowing into from one thing to another in a more natural, organic way. And I think for folks who are just starting out their careers or figuring out what they want to do, that's okay. And to not feel like, I mean, it's good to have goals, it's good to have a passion. It's great if some people are super highly motivated. I had friends like that in college and high school and law school who knew exactly what they wanted to do and had a passion, or had a very set kind of target in mind for themselves professionally, and that was great, and they achieved it, and they're super successful. Others like me sort of meandered and flowed and figured it out along the way, and that's okay too.